The night cloaked the hospital in an unsettling stillness. The soft beeping of life support machines punctuated the silence like a mournful metronome, while the faint echo of nurses' steps down the sterile corridors hinted at a world barely hanging on. Cold fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting jagged shadows on the stark white walls, as if the building itself trembled under the weight of unspoken sorrow. In the corner of the neonatal intensive care unit, Baby Theo lay cocooned within the glass walls of an incubator. His tiny chest rose and fell with the aid of a ventilator, his body fragile, his survival dependent entirely on a tangle of machines. Tubes snaked around his delicate limbs, their presence a harsh reminder of how precarious his life had become. He had no family standing vigil, no father, no mother to whisper prayers of hope. Only Nurse Clara stood by, her heart heavy as she watched over him. Clara, with her years of experience, had seen many cases in this cold, clinical environment. Yet Theo's fight for life pierced through her usual professional detachment. It wasn't just his solitude that broke her heart. It was the sheer unfairness of it all. She glanced at the clock on the wall, her fingers trembling slightly. Time was running out. "A few steps away, Doctor." Daniel stood hunched over a console, his eyes fixed on the monitor displaying Theo's deteriorating vitals. His usual resolute demeanor was marred by exhaustion, his shoulders slumping under the burden of an impossible decision. For years, he had wielded science like a shield, confident in its ability to save lives. But now, faced with a case that had slipped beyond his control, he felt powerless. "We've done everything," Daniel muttered under his breath, his voice a mix of frustration and despair. He ran a hand through his graying hair, his mind racing with the knowledge that the moment to turn off Theo's life support was imminent. Yet, something deep within him rebelled against the inevitability. The room seemed to hold its breath, the air heavy with tension. Clara watched Daniel silently, her heart caught in a painful rhythm of hope and resignation. Every second ticked by like a hammer strike, reverberating with the weight of an unspoken finality. The tension in the hospital hung heavy, suffocating, as the clock ticked mercilessly toward an irreversible decision. But then, as if the very fabric of the night itself ripped apart, the automatic hospital doors burst open with a loud crash. A gust of cold air swept through the sterile corridors, carrying with it the unlikeliest of intruders, a magnificent black horse. The animal, later called Aura, stood tall and commanding, its sleek coat gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. Its eyes, impossibly deep and sharp, seemed to pierce through the sterile gloom, radiating an intensity that silenced the hospital. Aura's presence was overwhelming, otherworldly, a stark contrast to the controlled, mechanical environment it had just invaded. For a moment, no one moved. The quiet hum of machines and the faint shuffle of footsteps were replaced by the rhythmic sound of Aura's hoofsteps against the tiled floor. The echoes reverberated like a drumbeat, each step deliberate, each stride purposeful. "Is that a horse?" someone murmured, their voice trembling with disbelief. Patients peeked out from their rooms, whispering in hushed tones. A nurse dropped her clipboard, the clatter jolting her out of a stunned daze. A security guard, wide-eyed and unsure, stepped forward, raising his hands in an attempt to block the animal's path. "Whoa, easy there," he began, but Aura's piercing gaze froze him mid-step. It wasn't aggression that radiated from the horse. It was something deeper, something primal and unyielding. The guard hesitated, then stepped aside, as if instinctively recognizing the futility of trying to stop this force of nature. Aura moved forward, its head held high, unperturbed by the chaos unfolding around it. The animal navigated the hospital corridors with an eerie precision, as though it had walked these halls 1,000 times before. Nurses and staff scrambled out of its way, some clutching clipboards, others gripping the walls for support, unsure whether to intervene or let the inexplicable unfold. Clara stood rooted near Theo's incubator, her heart pounding as the sound of Aura's hoofsteps grew louder. The rhythmic cadence sent chills down her spine, each step seeming to bring with it an electric charge that filled the air. She turned to Doctor. "Daniel," her voice barely above a whisper, What is happening? Daniel, normally a man of science and reason, couldn't find the words to respond. He stood frozen, his logical mind grappling with the sight of the horse making its way toward the NICU. Aura's path was unyielding. It strode past gurneys and IV stands, weaving through the maze of hospital corridors as though guided by an invisible hand. Its presence seemed to command the very air, bending the atmosphere around it into something heavy with significance. As Aura approached the NICU, its hoofsteps slowed, each movement deliberate. It came to a halt just outside the glass doors, its eyes locking onto Theo's incubator. The baby, fragile and still fighting for life, seemed to draw Aura's focus entirely. The room fell silent. Staff, security, and onlookers gathered at a cautious distance, unsure of what to do but unable to look away. Clara's hand instinctively flew to her chest as she watched Aura, her pulse racing with a mix of fear and awe. Aura stood there, motionless but commanding, its presence inexplicably powerful. It was as though the horse understood something no one else could, like it had arrived at exactly the right place, at exactly the right time. As Aura stood sentinel before Baby Theo's incubator, the hospital seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with tension and something unspoken. But far from the NICU, in the sterile quiet of another room, lay Ethan, Theo's father. Unmoving, tethered to a web of machines, he was a shadow of the man he had once been. Weeks earlier, a devastating car accident had left Ethan in a coma, his body fighting to cling to life. Doctors had done all they could, yet his condition remained unchanged. Day after day, machines performed the basic functions his body could no longer sustain, and the staff had all but given up hope for his recovery. But Ethan's story wasn't just one of tragedy. Hidden within his unmoving form was a bond that defied comprehension, a connection that stretched beyond time and logic. In the depths of his unconsciousness, fragments of Ethan's life flickered like old film reels. Among them, one constant figure stood out: Aura. Ethan had grown up on his family's expansive ranch, a place where the land seemed endless and the winds carried whispers of freedom. Aura, a young and spirited horse, had been gifted to Ethan on his 12th birthday. From the moment they met, Ethan and Aura had been inseparable. Together they roamed the sprawling fields, Aura's powerful hooves thundering against the earth, while Ethan laughed with unbridled joy. The two formed a bond deeper than words, a friendship forged in shared silences and quiet understanding. Ethan's parents often marveled at the connection their son had with the horse. Aura seemed to respond not just to Ethan's commands, but to his very emotions. On days when Ethan was troubled, Aura would nudge him gently, offering comfort in a way that felt almost human. And on nights when Ethan lay awake under the stars, Aura would stand watch nearby, a silent guardian of his dreams. As Ethan grew older, the bond only deepened. Aura became his confidant, his solace in times of hardship, and his partner in adventures both big and small. The two understood each other in a way that defied explanation, their connection more akin to a spiritual link than a simple friendship. Now, in the sterile confines of the hospital, Ethan's mind stirred faintly, as if responding to some unseen call. His memories of Aura pulsed with vivid clarity, a sharp contrast to the hazy nothingness that had consumed him since the accident. Back in the NICU, Aura's presence seemed to ripple through the hospital like an invisible tide, brushing against Ethan's consciousness. It was as though the horse carried with it an energy, a reminder of a bond that had never truly been severed. The connection wasn't just between Ethan and Aura, it extended to Theo. Though only an infant, Theo was tethered to this bond, a thread that linked father, son, and the loyal companion who now stood watch over them both. Subtle hints of this connection became impossible to ignore. The monitors tracking Ethan's vitals flickered faintly, a near imperceptible shift. The staff attributed it to coincidence, but the moment wasn't lost on Clara, who glanced uneasily toward the room where Ethan lay. Aura, standing tall beside Theo's incubator, turned its gaze as if sensing the stirrings of its oldest friend. Its deep, steady eyes seemed to hold a promise. Ethan wasn't alone, and neither was Theo. They were connected, by love, by memory. and by something no science could explain. As the night deepened, it became clear that Aura hadn't come to the hospital by chance. Its purpose, though still shrouded in mystery, was undeniably intertwined with the lives of both father and son. The next move was yet to come, but the unspoken bond between them would soon become a force no one could ignore. Aura stood as still as a statue before Baby Theo's incubator, its deep, piercing eyes locked onto the fragile infant inside, unmoving yet brimming with an intensity that demanded attention. The room was deathly quiet, save for the rhythmic hum of the machines keeping Theo alive. The horse's presence, so profoundly out of place in the sterile environment, felt almost sacred, as if some higher power had directed its steps. Clara, standing just feet away, felt a chill run down her spine. She had seen enough in her years as a nurse to dismiss fanciful notions, but something about this moment defied all logic. Aura wasn't just a horse, it was a force. And despite every rational thought telling her otherwise, she felt a deep, unshakable certainty that Aura was here for Theo. Then, something shifted. At first, it was so subtle that Clara thought she was imagining it. But as she stared at the monitors tracking Theo's vitals, the changes became undeniable. The erratic beeping of the heart monitor steadied, its once uneven rhythm smoothing into something stronger, more stable. The oxygen levels displayed on another machine climbed steadily upward. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She blinked rapidly, tears threatening to spill as she looked back at Theo. The tiny infant, who had spent days teetering on the brink of death, seemed to be breathing more easily. His small chest rose and fell with a rhythm that hadn't been there just minutes before. "No, this isn't possible," Clara whispered, her voice trembling. Her hands instinctively flew to the controls, checking for any sign of malfunction or error in the equipment. But everything was in perfect order. The machines weren't lying. Theo's condition was improving. Behind her, the door burst open, and Dr. Daniel entered, his expression sharp and authoritative. "What's going on?" he demanded, his eyes darting between Clara, the horse, and the baby. The sight of Aura standing there, imposing, calm, and inexplicably watchful, momentarily threw him off balance, but he quickly refocused on the medical anomaly unfolding before him. "Look at his vitals!" Clara exclaimed, her voice thick with emotion. Daniel approached the monitors, his brow furrowing in disbelief. He scanned the readings, cross-referenced them with Theo's charts, and then checked the connections to ensure there was no technical glitch. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered under his breath. His gaze shifted to Theo, who now appeared to be breathing entirely on his own. His frail little body, once pale and motionless, seemed to have found some hidden reserve of strength. It was as if life itself had decided to reclaim him. Daniel turned toward Aura, unable to suppress the chill crawling up his spine. "What is this?" he asked, his voice laced with equal parts awe and frustration. Clara didn't respond. She couldn't. Tears streamed freely down her face as she clutched the edge of the incubator, her hands trembling. She didn't know how or why this was happening. All she knew was that she was witnessing a miracle. Aura didn't move, its gaze still locked on Theo. It radiated an unspoken authority, as though it had done exactly what it had come to do. For the first time in his career, Dr. Daniel felt his unwavering belief in science falter. Standing in that room, watching the impossible unfold, he realized there were forces at play that no machine or textbook could explain. The hum of life inside the NICU was no longer ominous. Machines that had once served as harbingers of despair now pulsed with rhythms of hope. Clara, still reeling from the impossible recovery of baby Theo, clutched the side of the incubator, her tear-filled eyes darting between the baby and the silent, commanding presence of Aura. But as the air seemed to settle into a fragile calm, something stirred far beyond the NICU. In the dim, quiet room where Ethan lay, his body unmoving for weeks, the faintest twitch ran through his fingers. It was subtle, barely noticeable beneath the tangled sheets and tubes that covered him. The monitors by his bedside registered the change, their monotonous patterns shifting ever so slightly. At first, the movement went unnoticed amidst the routine bustle of the hospital staff. But then, a soft murmur escaped Ethan's lips, as faint as a whisper carried on the wind. His eyelids fluttered, the first signs of life in a man whose existence had been reduced to the cold mechanics of machines. Clara, still standing in awe beside Theo, was the first to feel it, a strange pull that sent a chill coursing through her veins. It wasn't a sound, nor a sight, but something intangible, like an unspoken call. Her instincts told her to move. Without a word, she stepped away from Theo's incubator, her gaze locking briefly with Aura's as if the horse understood her need to leave. She rushed down the hallway, her shoes echoing against the tiles, her heart pounding. She didn't know why she was heading to Ethan's room, but every fiber of her being urged her forward. When she entered, she froze. Ethan's hand twitched again, this time more pronounced. His head tilted ever so slightly, and his lips parted as though trying to form words. The steady beeping of his heart monitor had quickened, signaling the surge of life returning to him. "Oh my God," Clara whispered, her voice shaking as she stepped closer to his bedside. She reached out and grasped his hand gently, the warmth of his skin a stark contrast to the cold sterility of the machines surrounding him. Tears blurred her vision as she watched his fingers curl weakly around hers. "Ethan," she breathed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered once more, his face contorting slightly as though fighting to break free from the depths of unconsciousness. Clara's mind raced, piecing together the impossible sequence of events. Theo's miraculous revival, and now this. Ethan stirring for the first time since the accident. It was as though the two were connected, their fates intertwined by something far beyond human comprehension. Back in the NICU, Aura remained motionless, its gaze unwavering. The room around it buzzed with the renewed vitality of Theo's recovery, but the horse seemed to sense its work wasn't done. It tilted its head slightly, as if listening to a distant call that no one else could hear. At that exact moment, Ethan's eyes opened, slowly, weakly, but undeniably open. His gaze darted around the room, his breaths shallow and labored. When his eyes met Clara's, a flicker of recognition passed between them. "You're back," Clara whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. Though weak, Ethan's lips curled into the faintest of smiles. The bond between father and son, tethered through time and adversity, pulsed with life. It was as though the same force that had drawn breath back into Theo had reached across the hospital to awaken Ethan. For Clara, the realization was staggering. She clutched Ethan's hand tightly, her tears falling freely as she whispered a silent prayer of gratitude. Aura's presence lingered in her mind, a constant reminder that what she had witnessed was no coincidence. The air in the NICU was heavy, almost electric, as if the very fabric of reality was holding its breath. Aura, the majestic black horse that had defied logic by entering the hospital, stood poised and unmoving before Baby Theo's incubator. The room, now crowded with stunned staff and onlookers, was utterly silent. Without warning, Aura lowered its massive head, the gesture slow and deliberate. Its muzzle gently brushed the glass of Theo's incubator, and for a fleeting moment, it seemed as though time itself stopped. Clara, frozen in place, felt her heart skip a beat. The room around her seemed to vibrate with an invisible energy, something profound, something unexplainable. It wasn't just an animal's touch. It felt purposeful, almost sacred, as if Aura was channeling life itself into the fragile boy within. The effect was immediate. Theo's tiny body stirred, his eyelids fluttered, and for the first time, his impossibly small fingers twitched. Clara's gasp was audible, a sharp intake of breath that broke the tense silence. "Theo," she whispered, her voice trembling as tears began to roll down her cheeks. The machines beside the incubator told the story no one could have imagined. Where once there had been instability and chaos, there was now order. The heart monitor's rhythm was strong and steady. Oxygen levels climbed to near-perfect levels. The ventilator hissed quietly, but Theo's breaths were unmistakably his own. Then, as if responding to the collective hope in the room, Theo's eyes opened. They were wide, clear, and impossibly full of life. In another corner of the hospital, Ethan's awakening mirrored his son's. Lying in his bed, his body still weak from weeks of stasis, Ethan's eyes opened fully for the first time. His vision was blurry, but the memory of Clara's tearful face and Aura's watchful gaze burned vividly in his mind. Where is he?" Ethan rasped, his voice dry and strained. Clara, who had rushed to his bedside after Theo's miraculous recovery, gripped his hand tightly. "He's here, Ethan," she said, her voice a blend of joy and disbelief. "Theo is alive. He's awake." Ethan's tears spilled over as the weight of her words sank in. The mere thought of his son's survival reignited something in him, something stronger than pain or fatigue. His gaze darted toward the NICU window, where he could barely make out Aura's silhouette standing guard beside his son. Back in the NICU, the connection between Aura, Theo, and Ethan became undeniable. The room seemed charged with a unity that transcended explanation, an invisible thread tying their fates together. Aura lifted its head, its deep eyes glinting with a knowing light. It stepped back slightly, almost as if to signal its task was complete. But its gaze lingered on Theo, as if ensuring the boy's continued safety before stepping into the background. Ethan, now sitting upright with Clara's assistance, was wheeled into the NICU. His eyes met Theo's for the first time since the accident, and the bond between father and son flooded the room like a tidal wave of emotion. As Ethan reached out to touch the glass of the incubator, Theo's small fingers pressed gently against the other side, meeting his father's touch. Tears flowed freely from the gathered staff and onlookers as they witnessed the reunion. And amidst it all, Aura stood tall and silent, a sentinel of hope. It was more than a horse. It was a beacon, a bridge that had brought them back to one another. In that moment, the unbreakable connection between Ethan, Theo, and Aura shone brightly, defying every law of nature and science. Dr. Daniel stood in the corner of the NICU, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. He hadn't moved for what felt like hours, his gaze fixed on the machines displaying Theo's perfect vitals. His mind raced, a storm of questions swirling in chaos. For years, Daniel had been a man of unshakable conviction. Science was his foundation, his guiding light. Yet now, as he watched baby Theo's tiny chest rise and fall with effortless breaths, he felt that foundation cracking beneath him. The image of Aura brushing its muzzle against the incubator glass replayed in his mind like a haunting refrain. There was no scientific explanation for what had just occurred. No logic, no data, no formula to justify how a dying baby had suddenly come back to life. He'd checked and rechecked every monitor, every connection, but the results were undeniable. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered under his breath, his voice tinged with both frustration and awe. Clara, standing nearby, heard him and turned. Her tear-streaked face softened as she approached. "Maybe it's not supposed to," she said quietly, her tone carrying a certainty that Daniel couldn't ignore. Daniel looked at her, his skepticism faltering. "Clara, I've spent my entire career saving lives with science. I've seen what these machines can do, what medicine can achieve. But this..." He gestured toward Theo and then to Aura, standing serenely by the incubator. "This is beyond anything I've ever seen. It defies everything I know." Clara smiled gently, her own heart swelling with the hope she had almost forgotten she could feel. "Maybe that's the point, Daniel. Some things can't be measured. Some things aren't meant to be understood, just believed." For Clara, the events of the night had only confirmed what she had always suspected, that life held mysteries far greater than human comprehension. She had seen too much suffering, too many losses in her years as a nurse, but moments like this reminded her why she continued. Standing beside Theo's incubator, she watched the baby's tiny fingers curl and uncurl, his eyes bright and full of life. And then her gaze shifted to Aura. The horse, silent and still, radiated an aura of calm that seemed to fill the entire room. It wasn't just a majestic animal. It was something more, something otherworldly. Clara had no doubt that Aura had been sent here for a purpose. "It's not just a horse," she whispered to herself, her voice trembling with emotion. "It's a guardian." Dr. Daniel's skepticism continued to erode as he observed the unexplainable connection between Aura, Theo, and Ethan. He had seen miracles before, patients recovering against all odds, last-minute breakthroughs. But this was different. Aura wasn't just a symbol of hope. It was an active force, a bridge between life and death. Its presence had brought a dying child back to life, had stirred a man from weeks of unconsciousness. And now, as it stood watching over the room, Daniel couldn't help but feel a shift within himself. He turned to Clara, his voice quieter now, almost reverent. "Do you think this connection, it's real?" Clara nodded without hesitation. "I don't just think it's real, Daniel. I know it is. Look around you. You've seen it with your own eyes. Theo, Ethan. They're alive because something greater brought them back to us. The days that followed the miraculous night were nothing short of extraordinary. Baby Theo, once tethered to life by fragile threads of machinery, grew stronger with each passing hour. His vitals stabilized, his breathing became steady, and the once faint cries that had barely escaped his lips grew louder and more confident. The moment the ventilator was removed, the entire NICU erupted into quiet applause, tears glistening in the eyes of nurses who had spent countless hours by his side. For Ethan, the recovery was equally profound. Though his body was weak, his spirit surged with a newfound strength. Each day brought him closer to full mobility, and every moment he spent holding Theo was a victory against the odds. The bond between father and son, forged through adversity and bound by an unseen force, became the cornerstone of their new beginning. As Theo and Ethan's health improved, the hospital began to return to its routine. Yet something about the place had changed. The sterile halls no longer felt cold. Instead, they seemed to hum with a quiet energy, as if infused with the echoes of the miracles that had unfolded within them. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden rays through the hospital windows, Aura stood once more at the entrance to the NICU. The majestic horse, who had been an unshakable presence throughout the ordeal, seemed to sense that its purpose was complete. It turned its head slowly, as if taking one last look at Theo, who now rested peacefully in Ethan's arms. Clara, standing nearby, felt her throat tighten. She moved to the door, but something stopped her. She watched as Aura began to walk away, its steps slow and deliberate, the rhythm as steady as the beating of a heart. It didn't stop or look back as it exited the hospital, its silhouette framed briefly against the dimming sky before disappearing into the night. Do you feel the profound connection within this story? If you were in Ethan's place, holding on to hope against all odds, or in Clara's shoes, witnessing miracles that defy explanation, what would you do? Take a moment to reflect and share your thoughts. What moved you the most? Was it Theo's miraculous revival, Ethan's unbreakable bond with his son, or the mysterious presence of Aura? We want to hear your voice. Your comments not only help us grow, but inspire us to craft even more captivating stories. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and share it with someone who might need a reminder of hope and resilience. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel so you never miss another extraordinary tale. Thank you for being part of this journey. May your day be filled with wonder, and may miracles find their way into your life.